Before Eve, ancient Jewish tradition says there was another woman. She was made the exact same way Adam was, not from his rib, but from the dust of the earth, at the exact same moment as his equal. Her name was Lilith, and according to the legend, she refused to submit to him, spoke a forbidden name of God, and vanished into the desert, becoming, in later folklore, something far darker than a rejected wife. You won't find her name written anywhere in the book of Genesis, but the very fact that this legend exists at all tells you something important. Even the earliest readers of this story noticed that something about it doesn't quite add up. Genesis tells you humanity was created twice, once, briefly, as male and female together, and then again, in far more detail, with Eve built from Adam's own body. Two accounts, two different women, if you read it a certain way. And out of that strange gap in the text, an entire hidden mythology was born. That's just the first oddity in a story most people think they already know by heart. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what the Garden of Eden actually was, according to the text. You'll understand what the forbidden fruit really was, and it almost certainly wasn't an apple. You'll understand exactly what the serpent said, word for word, and why its argument was so effective. And you'll understand the exact moment humanity's relationship with God, with each other, and with themselves changed forever in the space of a single bite. This is the story of the first two people who ever lived, and the single afternoon that defined the rest of human history. Genesis actually gives you two separate accounts of humanity's creation, sitting back to back, and they don't read quite the same way. The first, in Genesis chapter 1, is brief and almost ceremonial. God creates humanity, male and female, together in a single breath, in his own image, and gives them authority over every living thing on earth. No dust, no rib, no garden, just a clean, simultaneous creation of both. Then Genesis chapter 2 slows down completely and tells the story again, this time close up, intimate, almost tactile. God forms a man from the dust of the ground and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man becomes a living being. The Hebrew word used for man here is Adam, closely related to Adamah, the word for ground or soil, a wordplay embedded directly into the text itself. The first human is named, essentially, earth or dirt, because that's exactly what he was made from. God places this man in a garden called Eden, described as being planted eastward, watered by a river that splits into 4 separate rivers flowing out into the wider world, the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. 2 of those rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, are real, identifiable rivers that still exist today, running through modern-day Iraq, a detail that has fueled centuries of debate over whether Eden was meant to be understood as an actual geographic location, or purely a symbolic paradise existing outside normal space and time. Inside the garden, God plants every kind of tree pleasant to look at and good for food, and directly in the middle of it, 2 very specific trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The man is given a job, to work the garden and take care of it, and exactly one restriction. He may eat from any tree in the garden except one. The moment he eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God tells him plainly, he will die. It's worth pausing on how simple this rule actually is. Not a list of laws, not a complicated code of conduct. One tree, one instruction, and an entire garden, otherwise completely open to him. And here's a detail worth clearing up early, because it trips up almost everyone who thinks they know this story well. Nowhere in the actual Hebrew text does it say the forbidden fruit was an apple. The text simply calls it fruit, no species specified at all. The apple tradition actually comes centuries later, largely from a pun in the Latin translation of the Bible, where the word malum can mean both apple and evil, depending on how it's pronounced. Medieval European artists ran with that wordplay, and apples have been painted into the scene ever since. But the original text leaves the fruit's identity completely open. Some scholars have suggested a fig instead, partly because fig leaves are the very next thing mentioned in the story. Before Eve enters the story, God makes an observation that sets the next scene in motion. It is not good for the man to be alone. And what follows is one of the strangest, most overlooked passages in the entire book. God forms out of the ground every animal of the field and every bird of the sky, and brings them to the man to see what he will name them. And whatever the man calls each living creature, that becomes its name. It's framed almost as a search. God is looking, alongside Adam, for a suitable companion among all these newly created creatures. And the text is direct about the outcome. For Adam, no suitable helper was found. This is where Jewish tradition, centuries later, filled in a gap the biblical text itself leaves oddly open. If Genesis chapter 1 already describes God creating humanity, male and female together, and Genesis chapter 2 doesn't introduce Eve until several verses later, who exactly was that first female presence chapter 1 seems to describe? Out of that textual gap grew the legend of Lilith, never named directly in the Hebrew Bible itself, but appearing in later Jewish folklore, most famously in a medieval text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira. According to that legend, Lilith was created from the earth alongside Adam, as his equal, formed the same way he was, at the same time. And according to the story, the two of them argued constantly over who should hold authority in their relationship, Lilith refusing to submit to him, insisting on her equal status. When Adam refused to yield, Lilith spoke the forbidden name of God aloud and flew away from the garden entirely, vanishing into the wilderness. It's important to be clear about what this legend actually is. It's not part of the biblical text of Genesis, and it was written down roughly 1,000 years or more after Genesis itself. But the reason it exists at all, the reason later readers felt the need to invent an entire backstory to explain a woman never even named in the actual text, tells you that the two slightly mismatched creation accounts sitting side by side in Genesis have puzzled careful readers for a very long time. In later folklore, Lilith's story darkens considerably, transforming her into a feared, demonic figure, blamed for various nighttime dangers and misfortunes, a mythology that grew so persistent that protective amulets inscribed with her name, meant to ward off misfortune, have been found among ancient Jewish communities. But none of that later mythology appears anywhere in the Bible itself. In the actual biblical text, the story simply moves directly from "no suitable helper was found" straight into the creation of Eve. God causes a deep sleep to fall over Adam, and while he sleeps, takes one of his ribs and forms it into a woman. When Adam wakes and sees her, his response is recorded as the very first poetry in the entire Bible. He declares that she is part of his own body, taken directly from him, and that she will be called woman because she came from man. In the original Hebrew, there's a deliberate wordplay here too. Ish for man, Isha for woman. A linguistic pairing meant to emphasize that the two share the same fundamental origin. The text follows this with a line that reaches far beyond this one specific story, functioning almost as a founding statement about human relationships, generally, that this is the reason a man leaves his parents' household and commits permanently to his wife, the two of them forming a single, unified family bond. Whatever else this passage is doing, it's establishing marriage itself as something rooted directly in this founding moment. And then comes a detail easy to read past too quickly, but genuinely significant for what happens next. Adam and his wife existed together in complete trust, with no fear, no self-consciousness, and no shame between them. Hold on to that specific detail, complete innocence, and a total absence of shame, because it's about to become the exact measure of everything the rest of this story takes away. Into this scene comes a new character, introduced with a single carefully chosen description. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. Notice immediately what the text does not say. It never calls this serpent Satan or the devil or any other supernatural title. Not here, not anywhere in Genesis itself. That specific identification comes from much later Jewish and Christian interpretation, layered onto the story centuries afterward. In the actual text of Genesis, it's simply a serpent, described as unusually intelligent, unusually cunning. Nothing more explicitly stated than that. The serpent's opening line is a masterclass in manipulation, and it's worth examining exactly how it works. It doesn't lie outright. It asks a distorted question. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? That's not what God said at all. God restricted exactly one tree, out of an entire garden full of them. But by phrasing it as an exaggerated question, the serpent gets Eve to correct him, and in doing so, get her actively rehearsing and reinforcing the rule herself. Eve responds accurately at first. They may eat from the trees in the garden, but not the one in the middle, or they'll die. But watch closely. She adds something God never actually said. The original command, back in chapter 2, was simply, "Don't eat from it." Eve tells the serpent, "You must not eat fruit from the tree, and you must not touch it, or you will die." That extra restriction, not touching it at all, appears nowhere in God's original instruction. Some readers see this as an innocent misremembering. Others see it as the first small crack the serpent needed. An exaggerated rule is a much easier rule to disprove, and the serpent goes straight for that opening. "You will not certainly die," it says, flatly contradicting God. Then it offers a motive, and this is the actual core of the entire temptation. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Read that claim carefully, because it's doing something specific. It's suggesting that God's restriction wasn't protective at all, but selfish. That God was withholding something valuable out of jealousy, not care. It reframes obedience as naivety and disobedience as enlightenment. It's an argument that has echoed through nearly every act of temptation described in religious literature ever since. The rule isn't there to protect you, it's there to hold you back. It's also worth understanding what the knowledge of good and evil likely meant to the original audience of this text, because it's easy to misread it through a modern lens. This isn't necessarily abstract philosophical knowledge of ethics in the way we might think of it today. In much of the Hebrew Bible, this kind of phrase, knowing good and evil, or sometimes rendered as knowing everything from one extreme to the other, functions as an idiom for total, comprehensive knowledge and experience, the kind of full awareness typically reserved for God alone. Read that way, the serpent isn't just offering moral awareness, it's offering godlike completeness of understanding, a shortcut past the entire gradual process of learning and maturing that humanity was presumably meant to go through naturally. Eve looks at the tree again, and this time she doesn't just see fruit. The text lists 3 separate, escalating observations. She saw that the fruit was good for food, that it was pleasing to the eye, and that it was desirable for gaining wisdom. 3 different appeals stacked on top of each other: physical appetite, aesthetic desire, and intellectual ambition, covering essentially every angle a temptation could approach a person from. She takes the fruit and eats it. Then she gives some to her husband, who was with her, and he eats it too. That detail, who was with her, is worth sitting with for a moment. Adam isn't described as absent during this entire exchange. He's right there, present for the whole conversation with the serpent, and he says nothing, does nothing to stop what's happening. And then, immediately, not slowly, not after some long, gradual process, but instantly, the text says their eyes were opened and they realized they were exposed and vulnerable. The very first thing this new knowledge produces isn't wisdom, it's shame. They sew fig leaves together and make coverings for themselves. Humanity's first act, in the aftermath of this decision, is trying to hide from being seen. Then they hear the sound of God walking in the garden, in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife, who had spent their entire existence up to this point in open, unguarded closeness with their Creator, hide from him among the trees. God calls out, "Where are you?" Not a question asked because he doesn't know the answer, but one that gives Adam the chance to step forward and explain himself. Adam's answer reveals exactly what's changed. "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was exposed, so I hid." Fear. That word had no place in this story until this exact moment. God asks the direct question, "Who told you that you were exposed? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" And here, in the very first moral crisis in human history, no one simply says, "I did this." Adam answers first, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Notice the structure of that sentence carefully. Adam doesn't just blame Eve, he subtly blames God as well for having given him this woman in the first place. 2 deflections delivered in a single breath. God turns to the woman, "What is this you have done?" And Eve, in turn, passes the blame further down the chain. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." A chain of blame, each link pointing to the one before it, man to woman to God, woman to serpent. And at the very bottom of that chain, the serpent itself, which offers no defense at all. The judgments that follow are specific, severe, and permanent. The serpent is cursed above every other creature, condemned to crawl on its belly and eat dust for the rest of its existence, and a lasting hostility is placed between it and humanity. Language many later readers connect to an ongoing cosmic conflict between good and evil, stretching far beyond this one moment in a garden. The woman is told that childbirth, from now on, will come with intense pain, greatly increased from whatever it might otherwise have been, and that her relationship with her husband will be marked by a struggle for authority between them, a tension the rest of the Bible, in various ways, spends its remaining pages wrestling with. The man is told the ground itself is now cursed because of him, that thorns and thistles will grow where there weren't any before, choking whatever he tries to plant, that he'll now labor and sweat for every single harvest, for the rest of his life, until the day he returns to the very dust he was originally made from. It's worth noticing the symmetry there. The man was formed from soil, and the soil itself becomes both his punishment and, eventually, his grave. There's one more detail worth noticing before the final scene of the story. Immediately after handing down this severe judgment, God does something almost tender in the middle of it. He makes garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and clothes them himself before anything else happens next, even in the moment of consequence, an act of care. Then comes the reasoning behind the final act of the story, spoken almost like God thinking out loud. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to also reach out his hand and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Whatever else this line means, it frames the expulsion that follows not purely as punishment, but partly as prevention, stopping humanity in this newly fallen mortal state from also gaining permanent immortality and being trapped forever in that condition. God sends the man out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground he was originally taken from, and behind him, the text says, God places cherubim, a class of angelic being, and a flaming sword, flashing back and forth, specifically to guard the way to the tree of life. The gate closes, not temporarily, not symbolically. The text is final about it. The way back in is now actively, permanently defended. And there, right at the very edge of paradise, the man and his wife are given names for a new kind of existence, one defined, from this point forward, by labor, by pain, by mortality, and by distance from the garden they walked out of. Step back and look at what actually happened across these 8 scenes. Not a single sin, isolated and self-contained, but a chain reaction, temptation, decision, immediate shame, instinctive hiding, a cascade of blame passed from person to person, and finally, judgment and separation. For thousands of years afterward, theologians across multiple religious traditions have built entire frameworks trying to explain exactly what happened in this garden and exactly how far its consequences reach. Later, Christian theology, in particular, developed the idea of original sin directly out of this passage. The concept that this single act didn't just affect Adam and Eve personally, but altered the fundamental condition of every human being born after them. Jewish and Islamic traditions, by contrast, generally read the story differently, often emphasizing human free will and the possibility of repentance far more heavily than any doctrine of inherited guilt. But underneath all of that later theological architecture, the story itself, read plainly, is doing something remarkably simple and remarkably human, showing exactly how trust breaks. A single instruction, a convincing argument for why the rule doesn't really apply or doesn't really matter, a choice made in a single moment. And then, immediately afterward, shame, hiding, and blame, the oldest, most recognizable human response to having done something you already know you shouldn't have. It's also worth noticing what the story deliberately leaves unresolved. The tree of life is never destroyed. It isn't removed from existence or placed out of reach permanently in some abstract sense. It's simply guarded, sealed behind cherubim and a flaming sword, still standing somewhere at the center of a garden humanity can no longer reach. Later biblical tradition all the way at the very end of the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, brings that same tree of life back one final time, no longer guarded, freely accessible again in a restored paradise. Whatever else Genesis is doing in these opening chapters, it isn't simply describing a permanent, irreversible loss. It's opening a question the rest of the Bible spends its remaining pages trying to answer. 2 people, 1 tree. And according to this story, the entire shape of human experience, labor, mortality, shame, and the complicated defensive way people still respond to being caught, traced directly back to a single afternoon in a garden that no longer exists, sealed behind a sword no one has ever gotten past. That's the fall of humanity, according to Genesis, not a single bite, but an entire chain of small human choices, each one still painfully recognizable today. If you want the next video to go deeper into Cain and Abel, the sons born just outside that closed garden gate, and the very first murder in human history, let me know in the comments, because that story picks up exactly where this one ends. If this kept you here till the end, subscribe, because there's a lot more hidden inside this book than most people ever get told.